If you remember, we left off with the promise to Abraham and Sarah at 190 years old that they would have a son and they were to call him Isaac. Well, he did what he said he was going to do, and they had a son, and they called him Isaac. Now, Isaac has two sons of his own, Esau and Jacob. And we know the story. Esau is actually born first, but one day he'll sell his birthright to his brother for a bowl of stew. In Genesis 27, Isaac is old and near death, but he is tricked by his son Jacob, and he gives Jacob Isaac's blessing of the older son. So, if we remember the promise that God made to Abraham, I want you to listen to what God says to Abraham's grandson. In Genesis 28 it says, this is Jacob, he had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven. And the angels of God were ascending and descending in it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, the God of Isaac. And interesting, when they recite this now, they say the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. They include him in this. But it says, I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you, and I will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised to you. So he's just reaffirming the promise that he made to Abraham. And when I read this, I notice there's some pretty awesome promises in there that God makes to him in this dream. He says, number one, he says, one day this will be your land. All that you can see, this will be your land. Number two is, you will have to leave for a while, but I will bring you back here one day. And number three, no matter where you go, I'll go with you. We love to read the 23rd Psalm at a funeral. And the line in the 23rd Psalm is, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. And it's not because of what we do. It's not because of who we are. It's because you are with me. And so, no matter what Jacob's going to have to go through and Jacob's family is going to have to go through, God is going with them. Jacob's journey to the east. He journeys to the east and he meets with Laban, his relative, and he ends up marrying two of Laban's daughters. And there's a whole big story there that we won't get into because that's another sermon on its own. But he ends up having 12 sons through these two women and their servants, which was, I guess, a common practice back then. So he's preparing to meet up with his brother Esau, and he finds himself in an all-night wrestling match with God. And he ends up with a dislocated hip and a limp for the rest of his days. He also receives something else. He receives a new name. He receives the name Israel, which means man who struggles with God. And you know what? I think we can all carry that name. Man who struggles with God. So here are the list of his sons, because they will become the heads of the tribes of Israel. Because not only is he called Israel, the nation is called Israel now. And it says, so here are the names. Born from Leah, he has Reuben, Simon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. Then out of Leah's servant, Zilpah, he has Gad and Asher. Then two sons by Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin. And finally, two sons by Rachel's servant, Bilhah, and their names are Dan and Naphtali. Now, we all know the story of Joseph, right? We read in there, Joseph was born of Rachel, and there was Joseph and Benjamin, and they were Jacob's favorites. We know the story of Joseph and how Jacob loved him more and babied him, how he was arrogant and angered his brothers until they sold him. Even in this, we see God's hand. Because if we understand the promise that he made to Joseph's and his ancestors, we see God's hand in this because God goes with him. Even in the midst of this trouble, God goes with him. the song that we sang where we all stood. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. The Lord has brought me safe thus far, and He will lead me home. So that's perfectly fits the story of Joseph. So Joseph is in prison. He goes from being in prison, and he ends up being the second in command over the whole nation of Egypt. He's only second to Pharaoh himself. And a great famine comes on the land, and Joseph helps to save thousands of people from dying, including the nation of Israel. Well, later on, Pharaoh dies and is replaced. And his replacement changes everything. The new Pharaoh, either he doesn't know the history of Joseph, or he just doesn't care. Somehow, throughout the generations, the nation of Israel, they become slaves to the nation of Egypt. Generations come and go, and you would almost begin to believe that God has broken His promise, that the nation of Israel is in slavery for over 400 years. And it's only getting worse. Ironically, no matter how hard they push the Israelite people, their population grows. Remember the promise? I will make you a great nation. Remember that they will be so many, they will be like grains of sand on the beach that you can't count, no matter what the Egyptians do to them. So the story in Exodus 1, verse 12, it says, but the more they oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. In response to this, the king decides it's time for another plan, because this one's not working, right? So then in verse 15 to 22, the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose name were Sapphira, and I can never pronounce that because I want to say Fa. But when you are helping the Hebrew women during childbirth, on the delivery stool, if you see that the baby is a boy, kill him. And if it's a girl, let her live. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live? And the midwives answered, Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive. So God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, He gave them families of their own. Then Pharaoh gave the order to all his people, every Hebrew boy that is born is to be thrown into the Nile, but let every girl live. So, if you look at this from one angle, the wrong angle, you really can't see God's hand here. You really can see God's hand here. You can't see it other than the fact that there's being so many Israelites born. And then in Exodus 2, verses 1 to 10, it says, now a man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch and placed the child in it and put him among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her female slave to get it. She opened it and saw a baby. He was crying. She felt sorry for him. This is one of the Hebrew babies, she said. Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you? Yes, go. So the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you. So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, I drew him out of the water. So, do you see what's about to happen? Just forget for a second that you actually know this story. Okay? Just forget that you know every aspect of it. Leave your cynicism behind for just a few minutes. The enemy of Israel is scared. His fear drives him to be harsh, to be hateful towards the people of God. He tries plan A, hard work, and that fails. He tries plan B, get the midwives to strangle the little boys, and that fails. He tries plan C, throw them in the river, and that fails. And now we begin to see God's plan. God doesn't have a plan B. God never has a plan B. Because plan A always works. Okay, when the king said we're going to throw the babies in the Nile, God didn't go, oh, what am I going to do now? Oh, help me. Plan A always works for God. You see, God had chosen the family of Israel. God had chosen the line of Levi. The child was chosen by God. The very spot to place the basket in the river was chosen by God. The time, bath time for Pharaoh's daughter, was chosen by God. Even the rescue is chosen by God because he knows the heart of Pharaoh's daughter. Daddy, can I keep him? It's just one. Right? This is not like when they're looking for Jesus and we're going to kill them all. This is not Herod's story. This is just trying to bring the population down. So it's just one. God knows how powerful those words can be. From a girl to the ear of a daddy who loves her. How many kittens have come into houses because of that line? Oh, please, Daddy, can I just keep them? I'll take care of them all by myself. So, now, one of the boys is saved. Just one. But it is the one that God has chosen. This one would be fed the best food in the land by his enemy. He would have the very best education made available to him by his enemy. He would be cared for and he would be pampered by the enemy of his nation. And he would grow strong and healthy and safe. In Exodus 2, verses 11 to 15, one day after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were and watched them and their hard labor. He had to know who he was, right? He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Looking this way and that and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. The next day he went out and saw two Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" The man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed that Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "What I did must become known." Then Pharaoh heard of this and he tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. Now, remember, we're looking at the awesome power of God. Do you believe that he saw that Egyptian beating the Israelite by accident? I don't. Do you believe it affected him in such a rage by accident? Do you think he was able to get away from Pharaoh by accident? That even when Pharaoh tried to kill him, it failed? Because I don't believe it, not for a second. I see the awesome planning and the awesome power of God at hand. Time moves slowly. And Moses is going to get married and have a son. And Moses he's going to be a shepherd now for 40 years in the back desert of nowhere. But the plan does not end here. I'm going to read you the passage of Scripture. It says, "Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of the bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. Then the Lord saw that he turned aside to see. God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, Do not come near. Take off your sandals off your feet, for this place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their suffering. And I have come down to deliver them of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of the land to a good and broad land, flowing with milk and honey, the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now behold, the cry of my people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression on which the Egyptians oppressed them. Now, up until this point, Moses is probably pretty excited. Right? This bush is burning, but it's not burning. God is speaking to him out of the bush, and God says, I know exactly what's going on. And I've heard everything. I know their pain. I know their suffering. I'm about to do something about it. And Moses is like, great. And then he says this, come, I will send you to Pharaoh. That you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? He said, but I will be with you. Remember the promise? But I will be with you. And this shall be a sign to you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. Then Moses said to God, if I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? And God said to Moses, I am who I am. He said to them, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. This story goes from pretty exciting to pretty scary for Moses in a heartbeat. If you read the story on, basically Moses says, here I am, God, send Aaron. And we're all pretty good at that. I love it when people come to me and say, Pastor, God has laid on my heart that we need to do this ministry. And I say, when are you ready to start? And everybody goes, but I thought you were going to do it. No, God's laid it on your heart. God spoke to Moses for a reason. Because God had picked him. God had planned it. God was going to send him. We begin to understand the awesome plan of God. The daughter of Pharaoh may have said, Daddy, can I keep it? And we know that God was whispering in her ear, sure you can. After all, it's only one little boy. The truth is, it was not one little boy. The truth is, it was just one little boy. It was just one little boy that God wanted to save. It was just part of God's awesome plan. From a stepson of the king to a nobody shepherd to a national leader. All through the awesome plan of God. When we went down to Washington, D.C., and we went to the Bible Museum, it's very interesting because it's all divided up in different levels. And we went into the Old Testament section. And the Old Testament section was actually the people, it's a private family who built this museum. And they contacted the nation of Israel and said, like, can you people do the Old Testament part of it? We'd like to give you, authority over this. And so their section is really, really neat because you walk through it and it's all like little displays and people talking and explaining, people dressed in the garb. And there was a man there that was talking about Moses. And he said these 3 things about the journey of Moses. And I typed it in my phone because I thought it was so cool. He said, Moses spent the first 40 years of his life trying to make something of himself. Then he spent the next 40 years of his life trying to be a nobody. And then he's going to spend the next 40 years of his life allowing God to make him into someone he could use. Journey wasn't easy. But I thought, wow, what a simple and amazing way to put it. Moses is scared. He's probably thinking that his life has just been a series of accidents. You ever feel like that? That your life is just a series of accidents? Well, I was lucky and this was that. And I'm in a terrible emotional state today because I went to a rescue call last night. And this 45-year-old man twisted his ankle at work this week. And somehow a blood clot killed him last night. I spent the whole day with family on the back lawn yesterday. And I came home and I sat there and I was like, I did a wedding yesterday, of course. It was Saturday and I do a wedding. 2 miracles. But I did a wedding and this young man had a 15-year-old daughter. And I just kept saying, that's one little girl will never have her father walk her down the aisle. Life is precious. But sometimes we get whining and we get complaining and we get moaning and we think our life is just nothing but a series of accidents. But I woke up this morning and I'm still breathing. I got a wife who likes me a little. Life is good. Moses stutters. And God wants him to speak to the king. This just doesn't make sense. I stutter and I stammer. My Uncle Jim stuttered. And when he was a kid, it would just get going and going and going and going and going. And my grandfather had to say, stop. Take a breath. Try again. The speaker up at Burt Camp. What's his name again?
James Swanson.
Yeah, James Swanson. He stutters. And you think, God would call someone who stutters to be a preacher. He does an amazing job. So Moses is looking for a way out, but he stutters. And God's going to send him to speak to the king. God will have to lead the people. Moses will have to lead the people of God who don't know him. He didn't grow up with him. He grew up with the Egyptians. He's going to have to learn the customs. He's going to have to learn it all. Of course, God will teach him. He'll have a pretty good teacher. But God will do things through Moses the world has never seen and will never see again. The thing that always amazes me, I know we're going to look at the plagues, as we go on, and we're going to look at the Exodus. But the thing that always amazes me is the manna. And the mathematical calculations of the manna. And we know the story of the manna. The manna will fall on the ground, and in the morning they'll go and pick it up, and they'll get enough for the day, and if they pick up enough for 2 days, it'll rot. But they can pick it up the day before the Sabbath, which is their Friday, because their Sabbath is on Saturday. So Friday they can go out and pick up 2 days worth and it won't rot, because they're not supposed to do it on Saturday. And if you figure it out, mathematically how much it would take 2 trains of 117 boxcars every day. Every day. For 40 years. They get up in the morning and every morning it's there. And they cross the Jordan River and it's never happened since. You can't make up a lie like that. People look at the Bible and say, well, it can't be true. I'm sorry, but over 1 million people ate it for 40 years. In the middle of the most harsh, dry desert land you could think of. My favorite speaker was E.B. Hill. And he said he visited all the deserts. That was one of his plans. And he visited the desert where Jesus was tempted. And he visited the desert before the crossing of the Red Sea. And he visited the wilderness that they went through. And he says, nothing grows there. Nothing. Lizards moved out. And they ate something every day for 40 years. You can't make up a lie like that. You know why people get caught doing stuff? Because somebody always opens their mouth. Right? If two people know the secret, it's getting out. If you did something wrong and there's two of you, sooner or later somebody's talking. That's what investigators do. They get people, sooner or later somebody spills the beans, they say. There was over 1 million Israelites. Do you think it was a lie? And they all kept the secret? Shh, don't tell anybody. We had chicken delivered every night. Pizza on Thursdays. Fish on Fridays. 40 years, manna will fall. Every day, they will eat it. You have a hard time getting me to eat things 3 days in a row, but they ate it for 40 years. Moses asked this question. Who do I say sent me? Like, you can tell he doesn't even really know God. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that awesome? That God would call him and he really doesn't know him. If he was raised as a Jew, he would probably say, Yahweh sent me. He doesn't really know. Who do I tell him sent me? Like, somehow he knows it's God. But he doesn't know God on a personal level. And so God gives him this answer. I am. I am. You tell them, I am sent you. You remember the words of Jesus? I tell you, before Abraham was, I am. And that's why they hated him. Moses is not ready to do this. Let me tell you something. If Moses had 1,000 years, he wouldn't be ready to do that. We are never ready for God's ministry. I remember the first time when I did a supply pastorate here, I did 18 months supply pastorate. Was I ready for that? No, nobody was ready for that. It wasn't that I did anything, just God was with me. Same God. He wasn't ready and he wouldn't be ready if he had 1,000 years. But he wouldn't go alone, would he? He will go with the awesome I am. And the world will change because of that God and what God will do through Moses. And we're going to continue with this story next week.